is going on? No horsing around family. Zach Boyd, Stephen Burton, James Boyd of The Athletic back here for the live stream. Guys, we've got a lot to talk about, reacting to Shane Steichen's press conference, as well as maybe future direction. Jim Bob Cooter, baby. I mean, what a name. We'll probably talk about that a little bit as we get going here. Stephen, I'm going to kind of give the floor to James just to kind of kick this off. Just your initial, I know you had a chance to ask Shane Steichen a question when you were down there. Just some overall takeaways that you had when you were down there, front row, chance to speak with this guy. He's a pretty direct, pretty matter-of-fact type of guy, huh?
Yeah, that was my interpretation as well. I will say that I'm not one of those people who overanalyze the initial press conference, right? And people are like, did they win the press conference? Did they lose? Don't care. You have to win on Sundays. That's what happens in this league. That's what matters. But I do think that it's interesting how we try to label certain coaches, right? We want to know, is he a rah-rah guy? Is he an analytical guy? Is he a more scholarly type of approach like Frank Reich? But I think that he's probably a little bit of both or all of those things, right? I don't think he's going to be one or the other. I don't think he's going to be like the Mike Vrabel type where he's in your face all the time. But I did find it interesting that he was very stern after he got through the emotional part about his family and how he got there to, business, like the standard's the standard. I'm going to hold guys accountable. You can tell the tone in his voice that he meant that, and where he comes from with Nick Sirianni, the guys he's learned from. Obviously, I expect that to be the case here in Indianapolis. So it was exciting. It was cool to see him, finally in the seat and finally have a coach and end this exhaustive search. I know all of us were kind of like, what the heck is going on? Who are they going to pick? But I think they got a great coach, especially considering the situation heading into the draft and presumably drafting a young quarterback.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. Stephen, had to have really a good chance to see you react as well. Just some initial thoughts just on Shane Steichen demeanor. I know that was the question that we had, right? Like, what was his demeanor? And I've always felt like, James had a really good point. I don't really care so much about the rah-rah guy because I've always felt the rah-rah wears off, right? You can only go screaming in a room full of adults for so long, and then it's just whatever it is. They kind of tune you out. However, accountability, 100%, that never goes away if you do it the right way. Just curious, Stephen, your thoughts on Shane Steichen and just your first reaction to that press conference and just getting to know a little bit more about him.
I mean, you're right. Like, one of the things we talked about was once we knew it was headed that way, you started doing like all this. Like, I know I started doing a bunch of digging, trying to find, it's the NFL. There's lots of mic'd up. I want to see what he's like, not in a press conference. What does he sound like in the meeting rooms? And everyone saw the video, obviously, where he's talking about winning the division. But my first initial reaction was I loved kind of the passion, the emotion that he showed when he was in the beginning of it, talking about and who he ran through, thanking everybody. I sat there, I was like, man, I mean, for me, I look at that as one, it was such a whirlwind, probably like 36 hours for him coming off of losing the Super Bowl, flying to Indy, getting the job, doing the deal, doing the press conference and all of that, but also just like how much you could see that it meant to him. Like, I liked that. That was my initial gut reaction was, okay, I like that. And then hearing him talk throughout, I think James is like so spot on with it, is like, he was, the way is the way. Like, I feel like watching him and kind of reading some and hearing you talk about it, James, on, I'm going to call it 1% better until you guys change the name. But hearing you guys talk about it too, is like, he's got a different kind of leadership, and it might rub some people the wrong way in the beginning, and they're going to have to get used to it. But I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of what you guys have said. I mean, he seems like a guy who basically, Mike Vrabel said something. I said it earlier on the podcast when we had Kevin Bowen on, and it really stood out to me. He said, we need to talk less and do more. Right. And I think that's probably the sentiment of the Indianapolis Colts. We need to talk a whole lot less. I mean, James, you were front row. How many damn times did you go there and the offensive lineman said, we just can't have this happen again. We just can't go down this route again. But here we are, I mean, and I think that all goes back to that. But Shane Steichen gave me that vibe a little bit. Like, I'm not really here to talk. I'm not really here to be like your PR guy. I'm here to get the damn job done, and that was just, for what you can take out of a little bitty tiny, sound clip of a press conference, looked pretty good.
Yeah, I think the other thing you touched on a little bit right there, we're probably not going to get a lot of the great sound bites, right? Which, from a media standpoint, you love that stuff. You love when the coach or the best player is the best quote. But at the same time, you also don't care because as soon as something doesn't go right, or if this doesn't work out, as well as you hope it would, we're going to rip you anyways. Whether you were good with the media, not good with the media, it doesn't matter. So I think the biggest thing when it comes to, again, analyzing who a coach is, their perception, their personality, just be you. Like, if that's who you are, and you're not the rah-rah guy, you're not the guy who gets in your face, if you're not, the Frank Reich type, if you're more of a Nick Sirianni type when it gets down to it, that's fine. And again, that's not knocking anybody's style, because obviously we've seen a lot of different styles work in this league. I mean, Bill Belichick has never won any press conference, but he's won a lot of games. And so that's what matters. And so I think you got to be yourself, lean into that. And again, that decision to bring him in, to hire him, works well with where you are now in the draft, looking at 4 quarterbacks who are projected first rounders and deciding which one that you like the most. And then also, given his history with quarterbacks, the variety of quarterbacks that he's worked with. I mean, Philip Rivers, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, they have nothing alike, but they were all having career years, with Shane Steichen, in their ear and helping guide them on the sideline. So I do think that's a great advantage to have as you evaluate quarterbacks. And it'll be interesting to see where they go. I know we'll talk about it, but Jim Irsay seems to have a guy in mind.
Yeah, hey, he kind of likes that Alabama kid, you know what I mean? And I'll be honest with you, Zach Boyd kind of likes that Alabama kid too,
I can't believe he said it. I was like, because and that's why I asked my question the way I did. Obviously, the real question you want to ask when you get in front of new head coaches, okay, which quarterback do you like? I'm never going to answer that, right? So
Right.
Let me just ask, what traits do you, like? And the traits that he mentioned, which I know probably got a little bit lost because of Jim Irsay comment, he mentioned, accuracy, decision-making, and ability to create, which are 3 things that Bryce Young does very, very well, probably better than anybody in this draft class. And so that made my ears perk up. And then obviously when Jim Irsay is like, with that Alabama guy, I'm like, what are you doing? I know Shane Steichen and Chris Bauer are probably thinking like, there's no way he just said this. And I'm sure that they were probably told going into that press conference, like, we're not going to talk anything about specifics of quarterbacks or anything like that. We're going to just focus on him being hired. Then Jim Irsay, the owner, says that, and then follows it up with a tweet about, Chicago, Lincoln Park Zoo, which I went to when I was a kid, and he's riding a bear, and he's like got a great relationship with the Bears, and it's like, what are you doing? So I find all of that, if it was any other owner, I probably wouldn't care, but if it was any other owner, they probably wouldn't do it. But Jim Irsay sure keeps me on my toes, keeps all of us on our toes. But I find it funny, but at the same time, I do find it a bit serious because there is a strong possibility that they move up. And I do think if you do, think that Bryce Young is your guy, if you go through this whole, the combine and the pro days and the interviews, and you find that he's your guy, there's no way he's going to be there at 4. So you have to trade up.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. Guys, if you have questions for James, you just hit him right here in the comment section. We'll try to pop those things up as we go along here on the live stream. Plan on going about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll just see how things go. Steven, question for you. Now that all kind of the dust is settled and everything, where are you on the and I'm curious. I'll let James take over after you comment. Where are you at with the mindset of bringing in an offensive coordinator? Now you've got 2 trains of thought. You've got some people who think let's bring in an established coordinator who we know is not going to get a head coaching job, but this guy's a lifetime. Look at my man Drake Wally with the $4.99. By the way, hey, I appreciate that. Hey, Steven, we're going to be able to eat another day, man. We'll have a hamburger instead of some bologna and cheese. We'll have a hamburger tomorrow, man. So I appreciate
love those Vienna sausages, baby.
Yeah, but to get back on the point, you like the new up and coming. I want the new innovator to go with Shane Steichen, or do you like a guy who stays there and is maybe just a little more stable, and you don't have to worry about that volatility of that side of the offense, knowing that whoever it is, the Alabama kid, the Ohio State kid, the Florida kid, the Kentucky kid, it doesn't matter who it is. How do you feel about the approach when it comes to offensive coordinators coming in?
Well, I think it's so unique too. So like, some of the names, obviously we know that they've talked about Jim Bob Cooter, right? We know with a name that Anthony Lynn has been a name that's been linked to. That's the older coordinator, ex-head coach. But I think something it's going to sound weird. I don't know how much it's not. I don't mean it in this way, but the idea of would you lose him to be a head coach? You hate that, but you do have the offensive head coach. What kind of like what you pounded the drum for throughout the head coaching search process, right? Like you have his system, and he was very open. He's calling the plays. Yeah. He's going. It's not going to be the coordinator. Now we know like Sirianni didn't call the plays, but he was instrumental in the game plan and holding kind of. A lot of people think, and James probably knows more, like deep, but holding Reich kind of accountable. That's kind of what you're looking for too. I mean, I would love, looking simply at the names that we've seen or we have speculated a little bit. Like, I haven't seen. I would love. I mean, I think everyone would love. What is it, Brian Johnson, right? But he's not. He's not coming. Like, no, that's he's going to be the OC in Philly, right? Like, we feel pretty confident that's going to happen. Like, that'd be great. But I think the fear of someone leaving is less. I was talking to somebody. We were going kind of the way back a little bit and talking about like Tom Moore, right? He never left, but you had him linked with Dungy, and I think Dungy, they needed each other. I'm not saying Shane Steichen doesn't need a good, young, up-and-coming offensive coordinator. I think that's fine. I think the impact, obviously, is less if he were to get a head coaching job because of who Shane Steichen is, which is the play caller.
What say you, James?
I think for me, you go get your guy. I don't think you should overthink it and assume that things go extremely great. You're going to lose the guy in a year or two. You go get him, and then you worry about that later. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to cancel yourself out of an opportunity just because you're afraid of what hasn't happened. You might get a guy, and, I'm sure all these guys have aspiration to being a head coach, but he might get there and say, hey, you know what? This is a pretty sweet gig. I like where I'm at. And so for me, it's not necessarily about, getting a young guy or an old guy. Just get someone that you trust. And in my opinion, probably someone who calls plays. And I know that sounds crazy because Shane Steichen just said he's going to call the plays. However, if everyone remembers when Nick Sirianni went to the Eagles, he called the plays until he realized it was too much to do. And then he had, Shane Steichen step in and do it and made them one of the best offenses in the NFL, along with a lot of talented guys on that roster. So I just think that if there's a possibility of getting someone who has experience calling plays, why not do that? Just because, again, you're saying that now. I don't doubt that he's going to, fulfill that commitment and be invested in it. But you might, get 6-7 games in and realize, what, this is my first time as a head coach. This is a little bit too much for me to worry about, and maybe I should be more in a game manager role on game day. And so I know Nick Sirianni talked at length about that, about how sometimes it can be hard to get plays in and also think about, fourth down decisions and things like that when it's all happening all at once. So that's something to keep in mind. But I do think that you just go get who you think is right and don't worry about what the future can hold because it hasn't happened yet. And the funny thing about sports and really just any job in life is like you want to get great talent, and then if they get poached because they were great at their job, I mean, you did something right? And so I don't see that happening. I don't see you going out and getting OC and they get poached because you had a bad offense. You're probably, get poached because you had a great offense, which is amazing, which would be great for your rookie quarterback and maybe year 2, year 3 their development. And so again, get your guy and worry about, that next bridge if and when it comes.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, great example of the Eagles. I mean, they go to the Super Bowl and then 48 hours later, they've lost their offense and defensive side. That's life in the NFL, huh? I mean, that's just the way it is. Drake, you brought up a really good point. Please hire Isfan. I think there's offensive line coach is a big, big deal for this football team because we all know they slid back last year, right? And I would venture to say, and maybe this is a little bit hot takey-ish, but I almost think the offensive line coach is more important than the OC in this scenario. I think you got to get the right offensive line coach to kind of galvanize this offense and to do what they actually want to do. I mean, we all saw what, Philadelphia, you can't stop these guys on 4th and 1. The only thing that can stop them is a false start, evidently. I think that is literally the only thing that can stop them. And man, if you can get that offensive line corrected, you can get that going in the right direction. That sure is a big, big, big time tool in big games. And as we saw in the Super Bowl, I mean, Philadelphia just about won that Super Bowl, quite frankly, because the Chiefs couldn't get them off the field.
No, not at all. I mean, in my opinion, Jalen Hurts was the best player on the field. He had the worst mistake. And
Yeah.
I know people will harp on that. And I was in a Twitter argument earlier this week about him displaying greatness. And someone was like, that's not greatness. He fumbled. If you telling me, 374 yards of total offense and 4 total touchdowns in the Super Bowl, the only quarterback in Super Bowl history to have 3 rushing touchdowns and obviously another passing touchdown is not greatness. Get out of my face. Get out of my sight. Like, do you like sports? Do you like football at this point? Because that was great. It was a great duel. I think that obviously Patrick Mahomes deserved MVP because he won the game and he was phenomenal himself. But Jalen Hurts looked fantastic. And again, a lot of that had to do with Shane Steichen, what he's able to do, the positions he's able to put him in. And I think that's what's most encouraging about him is like, and we asked that question as well, how do you build it? How do you approach a young quarterback and implementing him into the system? He's like, no, the system is the quarterback. Whoever we get, we build around him, which, again, that sounds great. But a lot of coaches who say that don't necessarily always do that. And you can tell with Shane Steichen's history, he's done that. And again, Philip Rivers are more established when he, kind of crossed paths with him. But Justin Herbert had, all-time great rookie season. And then obviously Jalen Hurts, again, took a massive jump from, second-round pick, questionable NFL starter to, MVP runner-up and in my opinion, a franchise quarterback. And now after his third year, probably in line to get a huge extension for $45+ million a year. And so, again, a lot of that credit goes to Jalen Hurts and the work that he puts in. I think he's a great, great high character dude. But again, success in this league isn't always based off of just your pure talent. Like, there's not a lot of players who you can just place on any team, right? And they're going to be great regardless. Sometimes in this situation, I think that Jalen Hurts is in a great situation to grow. And now you can see, that's what he is, which is, maybe getting some Anthony Richardson fans out there a little riled up because he's the guy who looks most like Jalen Hurts in this draft class. Would I pull the trigger on that? I don't know, but it definitely made me do a double take on him for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Steven, is Jalen Hurts a top 5 quarterback in the NFL?
Oh, man.
Putting you on the spot right now.
Top 5 quarterback in the NFL?
Or let me just say this. Are there 5 other quarterbacks you'd rather have than Jalen Hurts? Answer for me is that's a negator, Labrador. I'd rather have – he's top 5 in my opinion.
I mean, I liked him. Like, you go back far enough. And we weren't doing the show when he came out. I think we had just started it. But you can go track my timeline on Twitter, and I was pounding a drum that I would have loved to seen Frank Reich. Like I thought 3rd round, and he went a little higher than what I thought he was going to go. But I loved him at Oklahoma, and I mean, I am not an Alabama fan whatsoever. But it was like, man, he's looked really, really, really good in the Super Bowl. I would have liked him as a betting person who placed a bet on the game. I would have preferred him throw for one of those touchdowns instead of running for 3 of them. I missed out on something because of the fact that he kept running for touchdowns. But, I mean, he was James, I couldn't agree. If there was ever going to be a time to give an MVP award to a guy who lost, it would have been this one. Mahomes did Mahomes things in the Super Bowl. And can we just we're not going to talk about it, but can we just, oh my God, Travis Kelce saying no one thought they would even make the playoffs. I don't know who he's talking to. I'm so confused. Because they were the number 1 seed.
Yeah, not that comment, but people will say, oh, you're just saying that you can't win MVP if you lose. Travis Kelce himself said it on him and his brother's podcast today, I believe, or yesterday. He was like, hey, Jalen Hurts could have been MVP, like in a loss, because that's how great he played. And he has that mutual respect.
Was so good.
And so, again, you hope that whoever the Colts draft, if you're that franchise, if you're the fan of this franchise, you hope that you can get someone who can show they're not going to show it in year 1, but if you can show it in 2 or 3 years, like, okay, this is what we signed up for. This is what this looks like. And I do want to throw out there, again, Jim Irsay made a comment about Bryce Young without naming him, but he also mentioned that, when he was praising Shane Steichen, he was like, yeah, when we played you all beat us, and snuck past us because Jalen Hurts, and it felt like we had 12 guys out there. And that's what it feels like when you do have a dual threat quarterback. And I talked to EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin actually about this after the Giants game in New Jersey. Not New York, New Jersey. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why did the New York Giants play in New Jersey? But anyways, I asked them about this, and they were like, yeah, it is more difficult. Like, yes, the edge rushers and stuff are more bendy and twitchy and faster, but you still have to account for one more blocker when the quarterback is an elite runner. And so that's something to keep in mind. And I do think we're going to see more and more of that. as the NFL kind of moves forward into a new era. We're not going to see a lot of these guys who are the Peyton Mannings, the Tom Brady's, just stand back there and dice you up types. We're going to see a lot of these more athletic guys, even if they are great pocket passers, be able to do like a Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts and run for 20 yards in the Super Bowl.
I agree 100%, James. I mean, there's probably going to be a day, and it's really not that far off, when you're going to look at all quarterbacks who are elite in this league, and every single one of them has at least what I would call functional leg strength. The ability to use – Joe Burrow is not a running quarterback, but can he get you a first down? Yes. Yeah. Can he elude the pocket? Can he use his legs to buy a little more time for his team? And just the amount of stress that you put on a defense – when you give yourself an extra 2 or 3 seconds to let those wide receivers run those routes.
Yep.
We've had people on, I've had some players who've played in the past just kind of talking in between texting, DMing and stuff. And they said, you just would not believe how hard it is to defend someone just for the set play. But when things break down and I now have to play defense and I'm literally not allowed to touch this guy, I'm at a major, major disadvantage. And I think the NFL has found that and they've captivated that ability, and it's almost going to be a prerequisite, I would have to think, moving forward. Yes. Let's talk about quarterbacks. We don't need a ranking here. This is just all for fun. We're having a good time. But when we talk about guys like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, let's just talk about those 4 because they're all a little bit different, but they all have a little bit of the same as well. James, I'll start with you here, and then we'll go to Steven. Do you have one for you that you just say, hey, man, I really, really think that he could be special at the next level?
I'd say CJ Stroud.
Okay.
Mainly because I think Bryce Young is special, and I think that I could be in the position where I'm like, this is a freezing cold take, right? But I think the size does matter. He's 5'10". He's elite. He has stuff you can't teach, but he also has stuff you can't teach when it comes to size. And I think that CJ Stroud, if you're going to have a game that would change my mind, he had it in the biggest game, right? He did as much as he could with one game compared to any other player in the draft, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that he fits more of what, Chris Ballard likes as far as size. He's a size traits type of guy. And I think you can also kind of pair that with Shane Steichen and his ability to work with mobile quarterbacks, because CJ Stroud isn't not like he's immobile. He just doesn't use it to his advantage as much as he should, quite frankly. It's kind of weird, right? You have a guy who's gifted at something, but then kind of limits himself because he doesn't do it. And I think you saw some of that against Georgia, and I would like to see more of that in the NFL. So he's probably my top guy, just given he has the more of the physical traits, he has the accuracy, and then a lot of his stuff now is just like decision making and processing and being able to create, which I'm not sure how much of that you can teach. So to me, the top 2 guys are, Ohio State and Alabama guys. And then the other 2 are more of projects. I do think that it's kind of hard to evaluate Will Levis because of so many changes that he had and not having as many talented guys around him as the other quarterbacks. He's not throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not throwing to, some first round picks or top guys. And then you look at Anthony Richardson, and he's just – this guy is a freak athlete, but he hasn't thrown over 60% in the game as a starter at Florida. So that's tough to kind of bet on. So I think that, again, if you're thinking about, just safer bet with a high upside still, I would go CJ Stroud.
Steven.
So it's funny because, I agree. Like, Bryce Young, I think, is so special. But the size is a big deal. And it's not like the height's not as much for me as the weight. And then you hear that he's talking about he's trying to be, I think they said 215. He's trying to be 200, I believe, by the combine.
Yeah, he was trying to for this past season. So,
so he's trying to put that. And then my question is, if you do put on the weight, what does that affect? Like his ability? How does that affect? Because his frame is small. CJ, so I've been on an island a little. Like, I really do like Will Levis. I think I've watched a lot of the games because, living in SEC country, you watch a lot of the games.
That's true.
And I've told people, I think you have to go back to see what his ceiling is. You got to go back to 2021. You got to watch 2021 when he had the coach, he had the players before they all left. He wasn't injured, things like that. man, I'll tell you, like he's been up there, but like we talked about it like on a round table. Everyone wanted to see what CJ Stroud did in that game against Georgia. And I came away just so impressed with what he did. The question for me with him is that a one-off? Like you
Right.
didn't do it your entire career
Yeah.
at Ohio State, really. And then you did it. Like, would you continue to do it? And I am so with you. Okay, so this could be a freezing cold take, like you said. I don't like Anthony Richardson at all. I don't. Like, I can't square it away in my head. Like, I watched every minute of the Florida State game, and I can't square away a franchise quarterback not completing a pass for a quarter and a half. Like, I know he's so talented, and I know that the measurables are there, but drafting just for measurables gets you Zach Wilson sometimes, right? Like drafting for that wow throw, that big arm, like everyone comps him to Cam Newton because of his size, and he's massive.
Yeah,
I think if you were to draft him, you're placing a massive bet that Sykin can develop him. Like you're putting all chips in on that. That he can make him Jalen Hurts.
Will be your number one reason for drafting him is the coach you have in place to help him develop. Absolutely. I think that he's been number 4 on my list the entire time.
Yeah.
Not because I don't have anything against the guy, just that the other guys have proven a little bit more. And other guys have also been starters for more than one season. So I think that you see this flash in the pan, so to speak, and you see, again, some of these crazy throws. Talk to some of his teammates at Senior Bowl, and they're like, man, yeah, he'll make a throw in practice. And you might see it in the game. He does it 4 or 5 times in practice, every other week. But is that enough to say he's going to be your franchise quarterback? And that's what we're talking about here when you're talking about top 10, top 15 in the NFL draft. You're talking about someone who you think is going to help your future. Like first-round picks are, is a hot commodity. You don't just use those on a whim. And so I do think that would be a huge swing for a lot of, teams. And if you hit it, it's a home run, you're a genius. And if you don't, you're looking back like, why did we do this? And so that's the hard part, and why I don't necessarily get on teams for like redrafts and stuff like that. I'm from Chicago, the Chicago area, and so people kill the Bears all the time for taking Trubisky over, Patrick Mahomes. But hindsight is 2020. No one thought Patrick Mahomes would be what he is now. Otherwise, he would have been the consensus number 1 overall pick.
Of course,
so you learn from you learn from the past, but I think it's always a little disingenuous. And we'll look up for 5 years from now, and someone's going to, in this draft, isn't going to pan out the way we thought, and someone's going to say, well, I told you. And it's like, no, you didn't. Like, you didn't know this back then. And if you did, good for you, but it's not like you're right all the time, which makes it a little nerve-wracking. But in my opinion, why I probably wouldn't swing so hard on him, even though it is enticing given the measurables and just that he's a freak athlete.
Yeah, I mean, all very great points. I think I'll just start right here. Anyone who's listened to me knows full well I'm a Bryce Young fan. I mean, I just think for me, he's just special, and it's real. The size is real, man. And you can't just ignore it. You can't just throw it out and say, hey, this doesn't exist, because at the end of the day, he's got to play in the NFL with very fast, physical football game, and he has to be able to withstand that, not just year 1, not just year 2, not just year 3. He's got to be able to, when you draft a guy in the top 4, 1, 2, 3, wherever you end up landing, you plan on him lasting 10, 12, 15 years in the NFL. And if that doesn't happen, we all know full well what happens when your body breaks down, a la Andrew Luck. He just couldn't and that guy was a very sturdy frame.
Yeah, he was a tank.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it. So that is a concern. But I'll say this. I just think his ability to do things are so much more special than everybody else. However, the ultimate job interview was Ohio State against Georgia, where you're right. You guys are spot on. CJ Stroud looked incredible. And that's that functional leg strength, right? Like you can use your legs. If he can bottle that, week in and week out in the NFL, that's beyond good enough, to get it done, because there's no question this kid has the pedigree. He is such a likable kid. I've listened to him in a few different interviews. I mean, everything he said, you want to root for him no matter what. Even if you're not an Ohio State fan, you want to root for the guy because he's just such a likable guy. And he has, to me, and I kind of felt this the last couple of days as I've been listening to some stuff, he kind of has a little bit of a Jalen Hurts feel to me, not from a physical aspect, but from a mental aspect. Guy goes to Ohio State, hugely recruited, touted, but he never beat Michigan, right? Like that was just something that happened, the course of his career, and it just bothered him. You could see after that press conference, he was really emotional after that. Jalen Hurts dealt with a lot of that in college. I mean, how do you go from being who you are and getting pulled in the national championship game, and then you go to another team and you have a lot of success there as well. But there's something to say about a guy who has the perseverance to overcome all of those things. And I feel like he kind of vindicated himself. And if Ohio State kicks a field goal, they probably win the national championship, if we're being honest. They had Georgia on the ropes for sure. I'm with you guys as well with Richardson. For me, he's more of a guy, if you're going to get him and you're going to draft him, you have to build a whole system around him. That's why it works so well, in my opinion, with Lamar out there in Baltimore. They structured their whole offense around Lamar Jackson, what he does well, and gave him the ability to use his legs as a true weapon. And we all know full well how good Lamar Jackson is. When it comes to Will Levis, I just think he's just too inconsistent for me. Now, there's no question the guy can throw the ball a mile. I mean, he's going to have all of the physical tools. Him and Anthony Richardson are going to go to the combine, and everybody's going to be freaking out. Like, they're going to be able to run fast. They're going to be able to throw the ball 70, 75 yards down the field. That's going to impress a lot of people. But at the end of the day, you got to put it together right here on the football field, right? You got to be able to read those defenses and manipulate, the pocket and shift the line, make those calls in the most crucial moments. And I just think for me, Levis is a little bit of a step behind, Stroud. If we walk out of this draft with CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, I'm happy. I feel like you've probably got a franchise guy when it comes down to that. Stephen, do we get a couple comments on here that we could pop up?
I wanted to do this one. I popped up Will Scott where he said, Jalen was a winner. Everyone ignored that in the draft. What kind of intangibles are we ignoring this time? And how much should you prioritize measurables over intangibles? So I think I'll comment and then I'll pass it to James. I think that it's a balance of the two, right? Like you can look, Jalen is also uber talented, right? He is. He's a tank. He's got a great arm. Intangibles, you can't go just intangibles, right? You can't just be like, oh, well, he's a winner. So was Tim Tebow, right? Tim Tebow's one of the greatest winners of all time in college football. It's the two. I can't remember who it was that told me this, and I think it was leading into the draft last year. But I always say it because I really like the quote. It is talent determines the floor and character determines the ceiling of a prospect, right? And I think that's what you see with Jalen too, right? Talent determined where he's going to be at, but his character where he just is constantly working. That's the same thing like when you hear a comparison and a comp of Will Levis to Josh Allen, right? Josh Allen is a tireless worker. Like he worked really hard to improve his accuracy. Do we know that with anybody coming out? Like a sneaky name that I like in the draft, and I can't, like the Colts aren't going to take him, like because he's just not. It's not where like I love Hendon Hooker. If the Colts were picking like in the teens, like that's my guy right there, right? Like he does a lot of things that I like. But I think that's the balance for Ballard, right? That's the balance for this whole personnel department is we know they look at intangibles. Like we know that is a big thing with the Colts. But it has to be a combination of the both. You can't just draft on the measurables. But I mean, when we talk about Bryce Young, there's never been a quarterback drafted at his size ever, like to go number one overall.
And that's the question I got for James. James, I just want to ask you this question. Will Chris Ballard even be willing to draft Bryce Young? Like, is this all for nothing? Like, is he not going to meet that size, weight, and build, mandate that Chris Ballard has been very, very stingent and strict on in the past? You think Chris would take a stab at it?
I think he has to at least look into it, and I think that Shane Steichen will be a big reason why. I know he mentioned in the press conference that they see a lot of things philosophically the same as far as football, but he also mentioned that they disagree on some things, which this could be one of those things. And so I think he has to lean on his coach a bit, given his experience, given his track record, and at least broach the topic. Because, again, if it wasn't for height, he'd be the consensus #1 overall pick, without a doubt. I think that the stuff that he does, the talent he's displayed, I think about the Tennessee game or the Texas game, where he just the problem solving, improvising, the ability to just wiggle free and throw darts. I mean, that's special. And then also, I think it's interesting when you talk about intangibles and things like that. This is what the interview process is about. This is why it's so important, right? You want to make sure you're getting these guys' heads and get to know them as people before you hand them the keys to your franchise. Because again, you can be super uber talented. And, Jamarcus Russell was like that, and he ended up not really panning out because he had a lot of personal things going on in his life. And so again, I think that it's important to, even if they're not going to throw at the combine, it'll be huge. Just get in front of them, talk to them, meet them, and get as much face time as you can off the field, as well as on the field, because we all know, all these guys are going to look great at their pro days. There's going to be marginal differences in all of them, but they're going to go through these same routines for weeks on end and do it again. They're really going to miss throws. Everyone's wide open. Every throw is going to be great. And so, yes, I'm going to be salivating over every throw and every missed throw and things like that. No. However, I do think that there's going to be, that the part we don't see, even, as media members, we're not going to see these interviews. We're not going to be in that same room when Ballard's talking to these guys and when Shane Steichen is, talking to these guys or inquiring about these guys and figuring out who is who. So one of the last point I want to make is I did this in a story a while back, and, the ESPN had this story where I believe over the last 20 or 30 years, nearly every team is drafted up, to trade for a quarterback or traded up to draft for a quarterback. I got my words mixed up. And of those quarterbacks, only 2 of them have been below 6'2". It was Michael Vick, number 1, who ended up being a star, obviously. And then the other one was Johnny Manziel, who ended up being a bust.
Yeah.
So, again, it's very rare for a team to trade up in the draft and to draft a smaller quarterback, let alone draft one first overall, period. And so it would be unprecedented not only for Chris Ballard. Again, we talk so much about what he likes, but it would be unprecedented for the entire league. Small quarterbacks do not get drafted up or traded up for. And so, is Bryce Young the one you make an exception for, or the third guy you make an exception for? Do I think he's better than those 2? I don't know. I think that Michael Vick was pretty special in college, which is why he went number 1 overall. Johnny Manziel was a Heisman Trophy winner. Do I think that Bryce Young is better than him as an NFL prospect? Probably. But again, you just don't know. And so it is a huge gamble or a huge risk, although I do think it's significantly a lower risk than obviously taking Anthony Richardson, in the top, as a top guy overall, something like that. So I'm excited to see what happens, because similar to the coaching search, there is no big fish, clear-cut guy, right? There's going to be things you like or you don't like about each person. And then once you get your guy, which they're always going to say, that's our guy. You don't know if it's their guy. I would assume it is. You brought him in, you're not going to say it's not the guy. But when you bring him in, it'll be cool to see how you build that offense and how he's evaluated. And then I would also say, again, we're going to get so much, feedback, right, from that first game or even preseason. Whenever he starts throwing the ball in front of live defenders, even joint practices, we're going to be all over this stuff, right? But again, just remember, there's a lot more to this team that has to be improved. And so I would, kind of give everyone that, unless it's just catastrophically bad to start off, relax a little bit, because it is a rookie quarterback and it's going to take some time. This is a rebuild beyond just drafting a young quarterback.
Yeah, great. Storm Pig has a question. Have any sub 6-foot quarterbacks won a Super Bowl? Russell Wilson has won a Super Bowl. Let's ride.
I have to think about it. I think he was the last one, because I believe that Drew Brees was at least 6 feet. Guy, and I'm trying to think of any smaller guys who have gotten to that game, and it's not that that many.
It's not that common, but also I think there's been more of a willingness here recently when you see with Kyler Murray. We mentioned Russell Wilson a little while ago, Drew Brees. I think it's starting to maybe trend that way, and probably they're going to be very hesitant and scared to take a sub 6-foot guy until you have success, and then everybody's going to jump on that train when it comes down to it. But more to come when it comes to that. Very interesting. Wanted to switch over here.
I got before you switch, I got one more question for James on this, and you, Zach, and the whole chat. Does the fact that Shane Steichen has such a history with such a variety of quarterbacks, I want to get your guys' opinion on this, from Rivers, who's a pocket passer, to Herbert, who was offensive rookie of the year, who's mobile, but that mobile, like you were talking about earlier, Zach, mobile to be, he can pick up a first down here. He's got a cannon of an arm, and then Jalen Hurts. Does that make it more likely that the Colts stay at 4 because he can work with any of these different kind of quarterbacks that are coming out? Does it make it more likely because he can, like you said, James, what he said in the press conference, the quarterback doesn't fit the system. The system we make for the quarterback.
Yeah, I'm gonna say no. I think you have to move up if you want your guy, mainly because the Texans are right there. So you don't want to see the guy that you think is your guy go to them and then have to face him for the next decade. And he ends up being great. Yeah. Look at this division, right? The Jaguars have their guy, Trevor Lawrence. They look like they're probably going to run the division for the foreseeable future, given that they have the coach and quarterback in place. And so I think as soon as you identify your person, even if it is Will Levis, and you think that, hey, maybe he's not going to be there, maybe he'll be there for – you go up and get your guy and worry about the rest later, because, again, you can sacrifice second-round picks and future picks and draft capital, or, shipping off a Kenny Moore or someone else like that in a package to the Bears if you end up getting a franchise quarterback. Because as we've seen in the NFL, you get a quarterback, you get a coach, and you build some type of protection around him, the window's open. I mean, Joe Burrow said it himself, like, the window's my entire career. And it sounds crazy to say it, but he's been in back-to-back AFC championship games and was in the Super Bowl, and he's been in every single game. And it felt like once Trevor Lawrence got acclimated with Doug Peterson, he looked like, an elite guy. And so you go get your guy and worry about the rest later. I don't think you should wait at all, because you don't want to get the person you really didn't want, or think or hope. Like, you never want to hope or think at this level. You want to be able to control what you can control. And if that's trading up and getting a guy you really believe in, you do it and worry about the rest later.
Yeah, I agree, James. I mean, 2 great points. First point you said, I was thinking that along the same exact lines. Like, are you willing to face that guy that the Houston Texans are going to draft for the next 10 or 12 years? Like, that seems like such a devastating thing to do. And then on top of that, I mean, Ballard's been very transparent. I mean, he says this, I don't know if I believe it necessarily, but he said he is always willing to trade up if he finds the right guy. So if you stay at number 4, does that mean you didn't find the right guy? So you didn't find a guy that stood out above the rest. And these are his words, not mine. I mean, I don't know what that message that sends to him, to your team. And part of being a general manager is, we're on here and we're having a great time and we're having a great discussion and we're talking about all of these quarterbacks. We don't get paid to evaluate quarterbacks, but he needs to be the one to be able to differentiate which one actually is the best quarterback for his team, Shane Steichen. And then I say, you just make it happen, man. I mean, unless it's just a situation where they're asking for so much that they're just basically they're going to stay pat at 1 and nobody's willing to trade up and give them what they're asking. I say you got to go for it. You got to go get your guy. And I don't care if that's CJ Stroud. I don't care if it's Will Levis. If that's what you have the conviction on, at least that says to me as a Colts fan, I believe so much in this guy that I was absolutely not willing to let anybody else even have a chance at drafting him, especially a division opponent. And we got to look at this division. You've got Trevor Lawrence. You're going to have the 2nd pick in the NFL draft, maybe the 1st pick in the NFL draft with the Houston Texans. So you've got to think that they're going to get better. And then the Titans have been solid, and you'd have to think that they're going to do something at that quarterback position sooner rather than later. So if you want to win the AFC South, like you've talked about for so long, you might want to go get your guy.
Yeah, I mean, DeMeco Ryans is over there with the Texans. We know he was probably the hottest candidate of head coaching candidates outside of Sean Payton, this past cycle. And so maybe the Colts feel a little spurned they didn't do the interview with them. But yeah, you make a great point. I mean, the division isn't going to slow down just because you chose to kind of hold your cards tight to your vest or not swing for the fences. Again, all these moves are calculated, but I think that they have to trade up. And I would honestly be a little surprised if they didn't, just because of how crowded the top is as far as teams that need a quarterback. Maybe if you're in a different draft class or different, year, and all these guys at the top, 5 or 6 picks don't need quarterbacks, you're fine. But it's obvious that there's going to be, in my opinion, probably 3 quarterbacks gone in the top 5, maybe. And so we'll see how it goes. And I'm excited to see, again, just because there isn't a perfect answer. I could hear everyone make their case for their guy and be like, okay, yeah, that's a good point that you just made. And then go, flip-flop and take another guy. So we'll see. This is where I'm not envious of the jobs that they have because it is very, very high stakes for sure.
Steven, we'll go back to you. Curious your guys' thoughts as we round this one up. Free agency is probably coming up in about 4 weeks. I believe 4 weeks exactly from today, if I've got the calendar right. Close enough. 4 weeks from roughly 4 weeks. Our approach with free agency, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like Chris Ballard's going to be more of the same? We're just going to kind of be that, lull as far as it goes in free agency? Or do you expect us to actually make a few moves this year? It may be just a change in philosophy with Chris Ballard.
I think that the roster itself will force them to do more action this year. Bobby Okereke is going to be gone. Can't afford him. Got to evaluate if you want to bring Yannick Ngakoue back for the right price. Tyquan Lewis is probably gone given the injuries in his age. You have to, bolster up your D line or, your edge rusher depth. Paris Campbell could possibly leave. Obviously you want to bring him back, but again, if he does, you got to find another weapon out there that can give you some stability. And as we know with young quarterbacks in regard to the offense in particular, you want to find more weapons for him. Like the reason why Jalen Hurts looked as great as he did, a lot of it is to his credit. Most of it, in my opinion, the majority of it is to his credit. But he had guys to throw to. He had a lot of weapons out there. And so if you want to go and get someone who can, kind of stabilize your offense and give your quarterback a safety net, you need to go do that. So I do expect him to be a little more aggressive and address some of these issues and just address different areas of need that Chris Ballard kind of neglected in years past. Because to me, they still needed more wide receiver depth this past season. They obviously needed a lot of help on the offensive line. You gambled on some young guys and it didn't work out. I think that Bernard Ryman is probably going to be a left tackle of the future. However, it wouldn't bother me and I wouldn't be against going out and getting a veteran left tackle and someone to at least compete against and to shore up that side of the line, the most important line, most important position on the line in football unless you're a lefty. And so, again, these are all things I think they should address in free agency and they will need to address. And, again, I know that Chris Ballard said at his season-ending press conference that he's been kind of dogmatic in his approach to building teams, but hopefully Shane Steichen and company can kind of help him move into the future of what the NFL looks like and how to build a team. Because you look at this team now, and we've talked about this, Zach, like, your running back played out of his mind last season, right? Jonathan Taylor, he had a great season, first-team All-Pro. You didn't make the playoffs. How many first-team All-Pro quarterbacks do you have that don't make the playoffs? You see what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm saying. So, like, it's different when you get, that position locked down and the pieces around him. Like, no disrespect to Jonathan Taylor, but, again, you can't build it how it's been built, and I think that this year exposed a lot of that, even on defense, like your highest-paid guy is an off-ball linebacker. That's not how defenses are built anymore. And so I think that this will be a huge step or initial step, at least, towards building this team more of a modern style, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm similar. I'm not going to say he's going to turn into Dan Snyder of the Washington Redskins in the early 2000s, like where he's just throwing money at people, right?
No.
But we've all said this too. No one's talking about how much the Jaguars paid Christian Kirk. He had 1,000 yards. No one's talking about those when they produce. I think it's going to be different, but I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to see on my phone as soon as free agency hits, Colts have signed the biggest free agent in one of these positions or done this massive trade. I think, James, you said it best. Like he's going to kind of have to be forced to do a little bit. And then Wyatt in the chat brought it up and saying, if we're giving up capital on the draft for the young quarterback, that does force your hand a little bit more. That you're going to have to utilize free agency a little bit more. So, I mean, I think we're going to see a slightly different approach. I say slightly because I don't think he's going to go crazy by any stretch. I'm interested to see what he does. At this point, he's not going to go spend big money, but what does he do? What does he address? And I caught slack in one of the videos we did because I said, and it got brought up in this chat too, about Shane Steichen and being able to kind of flex that new coach muscle a little bit. And someone he's one of our longtime listeners, it's Basel. He's not in here, but I'm sure I'll hear from him, is that why would you do that? Like, you're not going to flex. And that's like, well, it's more of he can tell Ballard, like, and I'm sure he did in the interview process, you need playmakers. Like, we need to go get this, and that's flexing that muscle. And I think with the new coach coming in, I think that's something he could be like, hey, you need to get this going. Like, you need this. Like, maybe it's another wide receiver, or maybe it's shoring up. I mean, you're never going to tell Ballard to shore up the O-line. Like, he's just going to do that when he wakes up in the morning. But I mean, I think you're going to see a slightly different approach, but I would caution Colts fans to be like, it's not going to be where they're dropping big, massive money on these free agents on the first day. I don't think he'll ever do that. He's always said, I don't pay A money for B players, and I don't think that'll change.
Yeah, I mean, you guys both make great points. Yeah, I don't think he's going to reinvent the wheel here when it comes to free agency. However, I do think there is, I wouldn't call it a mandate, but I do think there's a seriousness level inside that building. Jim Irsay I would have to think that he has spoken with him probably ad nauseum, honestly, that we got to have a change in the approach, right? Like, something's not working. And I don't really care why it didn't work. We just need to figure out how we need to go moving forward, and kind of put these pieces back together. And never a better time to do that when you have a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal. I mean, you'd have the flexibility to actually go out there and sign players. And I wanted to get to a point that James made earlier and kind of double back. It was so good. Jonathan Taylor was the best running back in the NFL. I mean, there's not a question. And didn't make the playoffs. Think about this too. Tyreek Hill is at a minimum one of the best 5 wide receivers in the NFL. Mm-hmm. He leads the Kansas City Chiefs, and they still go to the Super Bowl the very next year and win the Super Bowl. That's the difference between a quarterback and really any other position in the NFL. So I thought James made a really, really good point. Zen had an awesome question for the chat, and I wanted your guys' opinion. James, you go first. This might sound crazy, but I wouldn't mind trading Pittman for T. Higgins. Come on, boys. Zen coming through with a nice one on that right here. What are you doing? If you're okay, hold on. I got to tee it up for you. James Boyd is the GM right now. James Boyd of the Athletic, the GM of the moment right now. You've got Cincinnati's calling over. I need Pittman, man, and I'll give you Higgins for Pittman. Now, you're going to have to pay Higgins that extension right off the bat, or he's not coming. But are you going to do it?
Man,
in consideration, you cover these guys every single week.
Careful now, you'll have to see them at the locker soon.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I do have to see these guys. I'll say this though, I think that it was interesting when Ballard was asked at the end of the season, "Is Michael Pittman Jr. the number 1 wide receiver?" And he goes, "What's the number 1?" And in my mind, that was the answer. He's not. In your eyes, because you're not going to say that about Justin Jefferson, not going to say that about Jamar Chase, not going to say that about Tyreek Hill. If you ask any of those GMs, the GMs of those teams and those players, are they number 1? They're like, absolutely. And you ask Michael Pittman Jr. and it's like, I don't know. And I do think that there are some limitations in his game. I don't think that he gets as much separation as other guys because he doesn't have as much speed. But he is a really good wide receiver, and obviously T. Higgins is great. And as a GM of the Colts, I would just figure out a way to get both of them.
I love that answer.
Over there, maybe just kidnap them and bring them back to Indy. But I do think that there's going to be some upgrades there. And again, consistent quarterback play will probably just help anyone in the wide receiver room. Jokes aside, it just was hard to get a rhythm when you're relying on Matt Ryan, who again regressed a lot. Then it was Sam Ellinger for a while, and he's just getting used to playing in the NFL. Then it was Nick Foles, who was in over his head. So if you can just get the same quarterback to start, the entire season, maybe we'll see Michael Pittman Jr. look more like the one against the Texans that first time around rather than, going 5-6 weeks without a touchdown. Because there was a stretch there where I was like, this is nuts. Like, Jelani Woods has more touchdown catches than Michael Pittman Jr. Yeah. And it wasn't like Jelani Woods had a ton of catches. It was just like, this is this weird thing where he caught 2 in one game. And he's like the team leader for a month, which is, not something that can be sustainable in the NFL.
All right, Steven, you don't talk to these people every single week, and you are answering this question. Are you trading for T. Higgins right now? You ain't weaseling out of this, bro. So come on with it. Are you going to take T. Higgins for Michael Pittman Jr.?
Man,
I think if you have to think about it that long, then maybe you don't, right?
I lean towards no because and I like T. Higgins. T. Higgins is amazing.
He's a baller.
And he is an amazing 2 on the Bengals right now, right? Like we can be honest. He's more than likely a 1 on any other team, but he is a 2, and he does have Jamar Chase on the other side, taking away coverage from him, right? I mean, I can't unsee where it looked like he was playing with children in the playoff game, and he just jumped up, and it literally looked like he was playing with children. Yeah. The jump ball catch, but that's what you want to see Michael Pittman Jr. do, right? Like they're both combat catchers. I will say I felt it was very interesting that in his opening presser that Steichen mentioned a couple players by name, and Pittman Jr. was one of them. I thought that was, I mean, and that may be reading a lot into it, but he did mention a couple of players by name. I'm not saying he's a 1, but I don't know if I do it. I think I keep him and ride and see what you get, because I think if he can develop some of that. I mean, T. Higgins is faster. Man, I'm talking myself in and out. I'm just going to stop.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll answer the question. You know, if they call me over, man, you know, I'm probably calling Michael Pittman Jr. and saying, hey, man, good luck with that YouTube channel. I mean, you know, you are super sick over there on Twitch with all those video games, and you're going to look great in Cincinnati Bengals uniform. but we're Higgins over here, and honestly, they are very close in talent level. I just think Higgins gives you a little more. And it's not much. I mean, we're splitting hairs here. I just think
can we point out one thing too?
Go ahead.
Higgins has Burrow.
Yeah, it's true.
Pittman hasn't had a quarterback, really a consistent quarter. He's not had any consistency. T. Higgins has had arguably top 3 quarterback in the NFL probably right now.
Yeah, I'll put him number 2.
Throwing him the ball.
Yeah, right behind Mahomes. And I mean, jokes aside, it was hard to see that throughout the season, right? You're talking to these guys, talking to him, Paris Campbell, Ashton Dulin, Alec Pierce, the rookie of all people. Like, how do you figure out this season, or how do you find a rhythm? How do you navigate all of this when you don't have the most important position stable? And so it was pretty jarring to see the reaction from it and the frustration from it. I think sometimes as reporters, it's like easier to kind of dissect what you see versus what they say. Like they might say something, but like there were times where like it was kind of hard to even track down Michael Pittman Jr. in the locker room after a quarterback change, because you could tell that's the last thing he wants to talk about is that, because he wants to. I think that he's an honest guy, and it's hard for him to always give like the right answer, which is, I think it's tough for all the players when you just want to say it how it is. Like, yeah, this is crazy. We're switching play calls, we're switching coaches, we're switching quarterbacks. And so given some stability, I think he could have a better season than he had last year. And then even like something as small as, having 99 catches, but like not breaking 1,000 yards. Like, when does that happen? Like, that's very weird. And it's indicative of how the season went, where it was just dinking and dunking and getting him the ball, but like not really getting him the ball, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I'll say, James, you were there, and I'd be interested just on your thoughts on this. Pittman was one of the guys that the season wore him down. He is an ultimate competitor. He loves football. You can just tell that. There's nobody questioning his desire to win football games. I just felt like the body language at the end of the season, he was one of the guys out there that was just over it, man. He was just over the losing, and it just I don't know. I mean, just your thoughts on how that season. Do you feel like it affected him and wore him down? Obviously, it's going to affect every player in that locker room, but he seemed to be pretty clear, just with some, body language on the field.
Yeah, I think given the jump he made in year 2, you're thinking, okay, year 3 is going to be pretty good. And again, coming into the season, we thought, and I'll admit, I was part of that media train that kind of bought into the Matt Ryan and his resurrection here. And then honestly, I don't think anyone out there could say they envisioned it being as bad as it ended up being. Like, I did not envision him leading the NFL in fumbles and interceptions at the same time at one point. Like, that just didn't happen, in my mind. And so I do think that of every group that was affected the most, it was the pass catchers. and it was the number one wide receiver for this team. That position is more reliant on the quarterback than any other, and so there was frustration there. And again, I think that there is no doubt that he cared. And it's just, again, when you're put in positions where we're going to stick a mic in your face and ask you, was it like to change the play call, or was it like to not have the coach that you were drafted, with and not have certain guys around you? What is that like? It's hard to always say the right thing and not, flip the table and say, what the heck is this? Because there was a point in the season where we all knew, regardless of what they were saying, like the product they were putting out there is just not going to be able to compete with, in my opinion, even average NFL teams. Like it was that bad. And so, at the end of the season, everyone's making these jokes like, yeah, they beat the Super Bowl champs and they played the runner-ups, super close. But in reality, this is a bad football team. And I think it took me personally, it probably was after the Denver game, which they won. And I was like, yeah, this is bad. Like the only reason you won this game is because Denver is awful. And then after that, it never really got any better. And you kind of came back down to earth, got some reality checks. I mean, you thought that Jacksonville here would be like a turning point, and it just wasn't. And so we'll see what changes going forward. But I think that a major change had to be made just throughout the entire team because, as you all know, for so long it was we're just a quarterback away. And now you realize you're a lot of things away because it came crashing down in this past season.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. Should be very, very interesting, fellas, as this season transpires. So, I think it's March 14th, 15th when free agency opens up. Of course, you got that, 2 48-hour tampering or legal tampering period as well right before that. And then you got the draft coming out. It's going to be an exciting time for the Indianapolis Colts in particular. Could be a lot of change. Last question before we get off here, James. Bobby Okereke is probably one of the more prominent free agents that we're going to have an opportunity to re-sign. You expect him to be an Indianapolis Colt next year? Because I do not. And then I'll let Steven end it out.
No, I expect him to probably be a Chicago Bear just because it makes a ton of sense. I mean, you had your first 3 seasons with Eberflus. He's over there. They have money. They just got rid of Roquan Smith. They need another linebacker. He's not a linebacker who's going to break the bank per se, but he does have to get paid, and the Colts just can't pay him. And I do think there's a combination of like how he's going to unfold it, right? Zaire Franklin steps up, and he has a hell of a season, sets the franchise record as far as tackles, had a great, great season, and a high character dude, one of the team leaders, and I think that you don't want to get rid of him by any means, and he's already got his money. So you can plug him in. You expect Shaq Leonard to come back and be hopefully Shaq Leonard again, the dominant one, the maniac. So he's back in lineup, and then you probably re-sign EJ Speed, because he's not going to be a high-level commodity in free agency. You get him back, and so you have, some of that core still there, and you go out and fill the pieces or fill the holes in different ways. But I think that Bobby Okereke is gone for sure in my eyes, just because you can't afford to keep him in. Again, he's a linebacker. If we're talking about edge rusher, I'm like, okay, cut the check. If he's Micah Parsons, if he's on that type of time, you cut the check and you deal with it. But he's an outstanding player. I think that he brought a great level of range to the defense as far as coverage and even getting up, stopping the run. So I know he'll be missed in that locker room, and maybe you do take a dip in play a bit, but you can't justify paying him a lot of money, mainly because you're not in win now mode. Like I could see if you were like, hey, we're right there. We were in the AFC Championship game a year ago. We're going to be right back there again. But considering that it is going to be a longer rebuild, I don't see the point in paying a 26-year-old linebacker, a lot of money over a 4-year deal, and look up 4 years from now and you could have used that money on something else, because your quarterback is stepping into his own.
100%. Steven, I think you're probably on the same page, but I'll let you know.
Yeah. James literally took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, yeah, he's going to be in Chicago. Like, I think that's probably what we all think, right? I think he's going to be in Chicago. Separately, I think Kenny Moore's probably going to be in Chicago. There are players off of the roster who fit Eberflus so much better that they could use. And you can afford, like, I think the last thing James said is probably the best thing in this point is that's money you need to be spending elsewhere. You really do. I love Okereke, but you need to spend that money somewhere else that's going to help the team because you're pretty with or without him, as long as Shaq Leonard comes back too, you're pretty solid in your linebacking core already. So I mean, I don't see it. I don't. Yeah, I think he's going to end up somewhere else.
I agree with you guys as well. I mean, that's money you could spend probably half that and get you a right guard, like a pretty good quality, maybe solidify that offensive line, or maybe you spend the same exact amount of money and you go out and get a more dynamic wide receiver, which we all saw, what Christian Kirk was able to do this season. Steven, you made a great point earlier. Everybody made fun of that. They weren't making fun of that, in January, because I mean, he was really, really helping that team win football games. As far as that goes, guys, I just want to take a quick second and thank each and every one of you guys. Every interaction has meant so much to us over the past year, this last season. It's been awesome. You stayed with us during this quarterback coaching carousel. Hours of searching, hours of podcasting, hours of just deliberating, and you stood here with us. If you haven't had a chance to join this No Horsing Around family, we invite you in. Come here, use your voice, be a part of what we're doing. We're super excited for what's to come next as well. James, can't thank you enough for being so good to our show and coming back on. Just before we get off here, what you working on the offseason? I know it's a little different. You get opportunity to kind of do some cool projects and stuff like that. What can we expect around the corner?
Yeah, I feel like you always hit me up when I just filed something. So scoop for everyone out there. Got a big board coming tomorrow on like the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft and the Colts' picks options.
Love that.
Get those picks, so that should be fun. We'll have some more things coming up. I'm sure everyone will have a mock draft, from every publication, but we'll have ours as well. And then, getting into some more, just getting to know Shane Steichen. The more we get to see him face to face, I know we kind of got that preview and everyone's salivating over every single word. And I'm just interested to see him again, and maybe not in that setting, right? More of in just a regular coach setting to see how he really is. I'm excited, obviously, for the combine coming up. So just keep a lookout for all the draft content that's going to be coming from us, you all, anybody else out there. And yeah, man, it's been fun. I'm excited that I don't have to go anywhere for the combine. I get to just stay here and be like a tour guide for all my buddies who are coming. And it'll be fun to see, these quarterbacks in person and really be a part of that mix, right? The combine is always fun. It's always fun to evaluate talent. Even the Senior Bowl was fun. But, the top guys weren't there. Everyone's going to be at the combine, and whether they're throwing or just talking or just walking, we're going to be analyzing everything and bringing you all the best content we can at The Athletic.
Absolutely. Steven, as you always do, send us out of here, man.
Yes. So I'm going to say 2 quick things. One, make sure you follow James on Twitter, and you need to inundate him now with new names for his podcast.
Yes. I'm glad you
inundate him. Yes. He needs a new name, and it's not 1%. But make sure you go and you subscribe to that while that name is still there before he changes it, because it'll just carry over. But inundate him with names because they need a new one, right? So make sure you do that. But yeah, I mean, I joked throughout it. The coaching search was tiresome for us. I can't imagine what it was for you. We did videos on every candidate. And when I started that, I told Zach, I did not think I would be doing 13.
Oh my God.
I thought it would be like 7. And when you just kind of kept going, I was like, I'm not doing second round ones. So it's a thankful thing for everybody who continues to watch it, who continues to be around here. And we're always thankful when James comes on. And we end it the same way we always do. I love you. Zach loves you. James loves you. Inundate him with names. We're out.
I need that.
Go Colts.